coffee upstairs.
Okay, good morning. Is this on? Good morning. Good morning. We're starting on time today. Thank you. I see some of our panelist audience who've come to previous panels, and so you're going to be in for a treat this morning, because do you see all this talent up here?
Over there.
They are going to they're going to do their thing. But before we get started, I want to tell you that our first movie this morning is Interstellar. Is it 11 o'clock? At 12 o'clock. All right. So this panel is 1 hour, and then we're giving you time in between for lunch. Yes. Excuse me.
Yeah! I love that film. Lunch.
4 stars.
So, but leading the panel is Claudia Puig, who was a film critic for USA Today for many years. She is are you the first woman to head the LA Film Critics Association? Others. Well, you're the first Latina woman to head the LA Film Critics Association. She is also on NPR, and she heads the Mendocino Film Festival. She does a lot of things. She's very talented. Ella habla español y italiano. And not ella, sorry. And she's going to, I gave her a very difficult task. I like to be inclusive, and so I invited as many of our critical talent on stage as the stage would hold. But I have immense faith in her ability to keep them in check. So, will you please help me welcome Claudia Puig?
Thank you so much, Chaz, and I'm impressed. I don't think I've ever seen this many critics sitting somewhere other than at a screening, so this is great. And as I look down here, I see, I think, 9 men and 5 women. This is a much better average than in our industry. So I thought I might just start with that whole issue, since that was the first thing that jumped out at me. According to a study done by San Diego State University, they found that 27% of Rotten Tomatoes movie reviews come from women. And then I think Meryl Streep did some research last year and found that there were 760 men on the tomato meter and only 168 women. So yeah, it's not good. So in this era of Me Too and Time's Up, do you think the male-dominated culture in Hollywood and also in film criticism has reached a breaking point? And I'm going to start with Nell, because you're right here.
Thanks so much. It's wonderful to be here, as always. I do think that we've seen some change. We all learned a very important new legal term on Oscar night, inclusion rider, and it's been remarkably successful. HBO just announced that they are adopting equity pay on their Westworld and their other productions, and a number of other studios have also agreed that they are going to not just pay people the same amount, but also reach out so that there are women on the crew, there are women scriptwriters, there are women in producers, there are women involved in every stage. And so I do think we have reached a tipping point. We're making some real progress.
Good. Sheila, what do you think that the disparity actually affects the success and failure of certain films, not by having so few women? And people of color. Let's broaden this out.
I think any conversation is just better when you have more voices involved. And so someone who people pick up on things. If you're not in the sort of the dominant group, people will pick up on things in films or in books or in any kind of critical conversation that may be in a blind spot. if it's all the same people having a conversation, there's going to be huge blind spots. So I think that
Right.
is just always, it's not that women are all going to like the same thing or respond to the, I love war movies and boys in baseball hats, you know what I mean? But, but I think a diverse conversation is just, in general, better.
I want to involve everyone on this panel, so everyone feel free to jump in too. But let's see, going down, Sarah and Rebecca down there, do you have comments that you want to add to that?
Well, one of my first thing, as far as the inclusion writer, I think it's kind of funny because I've been talking to creators of color. Issa Rae did a panel with Tiffany Haddish a couple of weeks ago, and she was like, inclusion writers are for white people. Like, people of color have been doing this for years. If you go on set with any movie or show, people of color have always been inclusive. So it's sort of like,
Yeah.
that's a given.
Yeah.
And as far as the diversity of or the inclusion of film criticism, I think it is needed because when we look at movies that win or are nominated for Best Pictures at the Oscars, overwhelmingly they're white male cisgendered narratives, right? And so we're seeing a little bit of a breakthrough, but I mean, movies that have won where women are centered are rare and in between. So,
Right.
Again, yes, and I agree with the who said that I mean, all women are not going to agree on the same.
We're not a
movies.
monolith.
Yeah, we're not
Yeah.
a monolith, but I mean, we do need that. Like, I think about movies like Pariah that came out, what was that, 6 or 7 years ago, and it totally got
Reese.
lost in the conversation because the chosen movie was The Help. That was the movie that was chosen and crowned.
There was
and
one
then-
black movie allowed.
Right, you know what I mean? And then Pariah was like, we've got The Help, you know
Yeah.
what I mean? And so I think at that time, if we had more women of color, if we were more included in the conversation, I think Pariah could have been.
Mudbound should have been up for Best Picture, too. Right here.
I just wanted to add to that when you look at the audience that goes to the movies, film criticism should reflect that. You can't have a diverse and gender balanced population going to the movies and have those movies only be reviewed by a bunch of white dudes. You have to have the same reflection of gender balance and diversity in the people reviewing the films as you do in the people who are actually seeing them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And there are more women than men that go to movies and large amounts of African Americans and Latinos. And we're seeing with Black Panther and Get Out and various movies that everybody will go to those movies. It's not just one audience that will go. I'm curious to see what you all think. And thank you for speaking up, Scott, because I'm not leaving the men out here. What do you think of the Bechdel test? And for those who don't know what it is, it's a test that was Alison Bechdel is an American cartoonist, and she came up with this test of having a movie be determined where two women are actually talking to each other about something other than a man. If that happens. We know how rare that is. And some people add if they actually are given names, women. So what do you guys think of the Bechdel test? Susan Wazina, I haven't talked to you.
I think it's useful, but there's many other things wrong with how different groups of people are portrayed in movies, and that's one simple definition. And if you actually watch movies with that in mind, you notice how many don't allow women anything but being defined by the men in their life. But what I learned as a movie critic, I always get assigned my films. I don't get to pick the ones I review. I was at USA Today with Claudia. She followed me into the critic's chair after I stopped doing it. But I found exposing myself to more genres, not just girly picks or,
Chick flicks.
Jane Austen, I learned what is out there because I had to for some reason, the guy I work with, Mike Clark, who's a very nice man, but he gave me all the Steven Seagal films.
Because he didn't want to see them.
I ended up talking to Steven Seagal because I knew, and Jean-Claude Van Damme, and the lesser Arnold films, and I went through this period, and people think a movie is bad, but if you don't see the movies I had to do sometimes, like Freddie Got Fingered actually made me want to leave being a critic. You don't know what bad is, so it gave me an education on what movies are, a broader spectrum. And I think, sometimes if you do break the mold of what you want to see, you'll appreciate, what is out there or not appreciate what's out there. So, but I think it's a value because people are still I don't know when she invented it, but it's still, no one's gotten a replacement for it exactly.
A woman editor just sent me a film to review, and she in the email it begins, "Now this movie doesn't pass the Bechdel test, but I think it's still worth seeing." And people point out Gravity doesn't pass the Bechdel test, but it's clearly a movie that we feel good about the portrayal of the woman in that movie. So, but I think it's a good starting point for a conversation, and Gina Davis has done some really interesting work on things like how often is it that the policeman shows up and it's a man when in fact in reality the odds are that about 45% of police are women. And so there is a lot that can be done there.
And do you ever find yourself, as those of us who go to movies all the time, I sometimes am surprised to see, the other day I was on a flight and there was a woman pilot. I was surprised by that. I'm surprised by women police officers because I go to movies all the time, and so that starts to imprint upon you.
Jump in here. First of all, I think we're going to see a movie about a female pilot in about 3 years based on real life events this week. Talk about a real hero.
Yeah.
I want to say a couple things. First of all, Guantanamo Bay doesn't let people see 3 Steven Seagal movies in a row. That's been outlawed. It's cruel and unusual, so I'm so sorry for you, Susan. And just to go back very quickly to the original question, the 27% figure I hear, obviously we have a long way to go, but I bet if we went back 10 or 15 years ago, that number would have been maybe half that.
Well, actually, women started in film
Well, of
criticism.
course we
Pauline
had,
Kael,
we had, even before that, when
Yeah.
film criticism wasn't taken all so seriously, you have
It was
May
women's
Tinay
work,
and people like that. But I think we are seeing improvement, and sometimes the movies are reflecting the culture, and sometimes it's the other way around. If you went to Comic-Con 10 years ago, you probably wouldn't have seen as many women, and now you see so many women who love, getting about that. Of course, you see little girls who are not only dressing up, wanting to be princesses on Halloween now. It's Wonder Woman and many other figures. As far as this most recent question, it's interesting too, because I think sometimes the studios are still, not just sometimes, but even those wonderful publicists we work with all the time who set up screenings, I think we've all had this experience. If it's a Kevin Hart movie and they give away tickets to the general audience through radio stations or online giveaways, it's a Kevin Hart movie, and you walk in and the audience is 90% African American, as if Kevin Hart is not filling 60,000 seat stadiums by not appealing to all kinds. And you see that a lot with the movies that we're screening. They're already kind of predetermining what they think the audience is going to be, and I think that needs to change as well.
Well, they're in the business of selling, which is another, which is not an irrelevant topic, but it's a separate topic, I think, in a lot of ways. And what they do is they just play to their strengths and copy what worked the last time. I found my most eye-opening adventure in moviegoing was when I had a daughter. When my wife and I had our only child, who's now in her 30s, taking her to see films at the age of 7, 8, 9, 10, somewhere in there, was really a new experience for me, because I was watching films through her eyes and through a parent's eyes. And I became highly conscious of films that projected or portrayed positive images, positive role models for young women, and those that didn't. And sometimes what I found, I remember seeing Karate Kid 3. Is that the one with young Hilary Swank? A film I would have otherwise dismissed entirely. but she was mesmerized by it, and it had a good lesson. It had a positive, moral, whatever you want to call it. And so I became kind of a defender of that movie on that basis. It left her with something, positive to take away. It didn't make me feel embarrassed or insulted as a caring parent. So there's so many different aspects to this. So I wouldn't whittle it down to just the Bechdel test.
No.
I
It's
think-
one useful tool, I think.
Yeah.
I think it matters for parents of sons too that things are changing. I love that my
Yes.
8-year-old boy's favorite films are Wonder Woman and Black Panther, and I think that makes a very big difference to where he's going to go and what he's going to do.
If we could just, and if Hollywood could just sort of speed up the sort of enlightenment cycle to not take quite so long to relearn the lesson that they learned, a year and a half earlier from Hidden Figures, and then they forget it, and then and that makes a ton of fucking money, and then and then Black Panther, $1 billion plus. Maybe we should greenlight. Sorry, I got a meeting at 11. And they forget about they actually even forget the lessons you learned from Jordan Peele's Get Out, where if you just throw more money at more different kinds of filmmakers that don't look like you. And it's in that smaller, medium-sized budget range. It's just saner. It's what happened. It's what's happened to the middle class in this country. Period. They don't think that way. It doesn't please the stockholders to think modestly in terms of individual projects. But if you have 100 of those individual projects, then maybe 13 of them turn out to be big successes. That's what'll help democratize all of our industries. They're all connected. Criticism, film production, distribution, and everything. The Oscars. You can blame the Oscars for not being enlightened enough, or at all kind of aware of a film like. I'm sorry, Rebecca. The film you just mentioned, I love that film.
Oh, Pariah?
Pariah. And that director, Dee Reese, is just flying. I mean.
And yet Mudbound was overlooked.
Mudbound was tremendous,
Yeah.
but that's kind of an issue with Netflix, and that Netflix did not want to even put that out in theaters. And
Yeah.
they barely did. I mean, we had to go in Chicago. We had to go to Barrington, which is a northwest suburb, to see Mudbound. Which is actually kind of amusing because that is like the whitest. That's like Conkeyville. But that film, and to Richard's point, that film plays like you don't have to love it, but Mudbound that is a rich, tight, fascinating movie, and I know every kind of viewer likes that.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I wanted to add
yes,
two
please
more.
do.
As far as the Bechdel test, there are 2 other tests. I know last year in the New York Times, there's something called the Ebert-Duvernay test.
Oh.
So as far as the Bechdel test, while it is a useful guide, it's still not inclusive enough, especially when we address how women of color are marginalized or erased. While I loved Wonder Woman, and yes, it was a feminist film, how many women of color actually had speaking parts in this movie? You know what I mean? And I think that's what made Black Panther so revolutionary, that a movie in that genre that you had so many black women and they weren't fighting over a man.
Strong women.
Right.
Yeah.
And then there's another test too that was just published last month by a good friend of mine called the Kent test. Her name is Clarkeisha Tent on Twitter, and it also measures how women of color are portrayed in movies and the interactions that they have with each other. So those are very useful.
What is the Ava DuVernay test? I'm curious.
I think it's really looking at how women of color that were not props to white women, that were not used to further or fridged to further the storyline of a white protagonist or a white
The
female
sassy
protagonist.
best friend.
Yes.
Yeah.
that,
Actually, Ava DuVernay will be here in a couple of days, so
Yeah.
you can ask her, tell me
Yes.
about your test.
Well, since you brought up, Michael, you brought up Netflix, and I wondered how everybody's job has changed with the drastic influx of content. And Sam, you look like maybe you're the youngest person on this panel, so you probably only have that experience. Yeah. Yes. So we can start with you. That's always been your experience, probably, but then we can get to other folks.
What's the question?
The question is, there's so
Damn
much
millennials never pay
content.
attention.
It's that ADD of you young-uns.
I set him up for that.
There's a huge amount of content out there. How do you sift through it?
I don't think anyone sifts through it. It seems like a lot. I imagine all of you have a streaming platform? Does everyone here use Netflix?
Yes.
Yes.
There's like 3 people that said no, I don't. Definitely not. Still
They
doing
use Hulu.
Yeah, no. On VHSs. I don't know.
Super great.
Read people that you believe in and go a little bit by their taste and inform your own. And what is interesting online, you find what's interesting online, but there's so much of it. I mean, I don't know how you could possibly watch everything right now.
As an editor, it's exhausting. Netflix is exhausting
Yeah.
because we have stuff every week, often added at the last minute. Hey, look, there's something premiering on Netflix tomorrow we should review. It's like, and that literally happened this week with a streaming platform. Spike Lee's new movie Passover is premiering on Amazon on Friday.
Oh, right.
And as of yesterday, we were like, oh, okay, we should probably write about that. So it's constant. Like, we used to be able to say, talk to publicists and be like, here's what's opening on Friday, see the commercials, see the previews. But now with Netflix, Hulu, and Amazon, it is nonstop because they're not very good at publicizing their own stuff.
Right.
They're not very good at categorizing their own stuff. Try to find some Netflix movies, it's almost impossible.
Yeah, you have to really
they're
look. Scott, you're
horrible.
nodding next to Brian.
I absolutely, Brian.
They're
I mean,
horrible.
you hit the nail on the head. So with Netflix and Amazon and Hulu, when a show drops on one of those platforms, like Glow or Orange is the New Black or Stranger Things, people usually know about them.
Right.
But not with the movies. I can't tell you how many times I've driven around LA, and I'll see a billboard for a movie that is dropping on Netflix. Just recently, the movie Roxanne, which I saw at Sundance.
That was a last minute ad.
A year ago, and I'm like, oh, I've liked the film, and I'm like, finally, it's dropping on Netflix. But the statement with these streaming services, especially Netflix, is that if a movie drops on Netflix, like Mudbound is a terrific film, but because it went straight to Netflix, the stigma was that it's like going direct to video. Oh, it's not going to be in theaters. Screw it. I'll just see it at some point. It's not a priority. But they are terrible. All the streaming services are terrible at promoting the movies. They are getting lost. The queue is overwhelming. I mean, should I sift through the queue or should I watch Star Trek: The Next Generation? I mean, it's a big problem that they should be addressing how to see the films versus just throwing money at talent for the next big thing.
Well, it all
Well, and I
becomes
think
noise.
that's the role of the critic, right? Is to do some of that. sifting.
Exactly. That's exactly why we're here. It's not to tell you whether you want to see Avengers or not. It's to find out these little films that we can bring to your attention. And with regard to Mudbound, it's criminal to have to watch it on Netflix because the cinematography is one of the strongest elements of the film. It was the first woman to be nominated for an Oscar.
Rachel Morrison,
Right,
yeah.
for cinematography. And it's absolutely stunning, and so much. I know we say this too much, but it's so much a character in the film is the settings and the cinematography that is a real shame.
What complicates this though, is that we cannot remove the financial aspect of it, and the reason someone like a Dee Reese goes to Netflix is because Netflix offers much more money for their movies than Magnolia, than IFC, and though those films don't go into theaters, they lose the theatrical experience. They are receiving so much more for their film that they didn't make for all that much money, and Netflix still has refused to show people the statistics for who watches what and how much is consumed. They won't allow that out. And until they allow that information, we really have no idea how many people have seen Mudbound. It could be that it's very popular. It could be that 8 people have seen it.
There's also an argument to be made that if SPC or Magnolia or IFC had bought Mudbound, it would have played in New York and LA and New York and LA only, and Netflix allows people around the world to at least see the film.
Right.
So it gets it to a bigger audience, even if they're watching it in a capacity that we as critics may not like.
And you want to cover as much content as possible on these streaming services because you often get the most inclusive, incredible narratives on there. 2 examples would be The Handmaid's Tale on Hulu, which is going to be my source of sanity for the next 3 years. And there's a show called Everything Sucks that had there's an amazing story on there about this young girl's coming out story that I never had seen really done as beautifully as on this show. And the best episodes are by a female director. And those are just 2 examples. That's on Netflix. Just 2 examples of great programming.
Yeah.
On the other side of the coin, the grand jury prize winner at Sundance last year was little film called I Don't Want to Live in This World Anymore.
So
With Melanie Linsky and Elijah Wood. And you'd think with that pedigree that was it. It would be, it would go on to great success. It was acquired by I think it was actually produced by Netflix.
It was. It had a release date before it won in February.
Oh.
And it just vanished into the ether.
I think it's
heard-
on Netflix now, though. You can
was
see
on-
it.
it was on 3
it's
weeks after it
available
won.
to be seen.
Yeah.
When I say vanished, it didn't make a dent in the radar of
Oh,
most.
you're absolutely right.
Most
Yeah.
viewers and potential viewers, let alone critics. And so there's no formula anymore.
Right.
There's no
The theatrical model
protocol
is changing.
to any of this that makes, as you were saying, how do you know what to cover? How do you know what to cover when you've just found out about it a day ago, et cetera, et cetera? And so to me, there still hasn't been a fair test of what everybody's been wondering about for decades, which is if you debut a film in a medium other than a movie theater or a circuit of movie theaters, can you get the same kind of audience? Well, they haven't spent $100 million on promotion and advertising yet that I'm aware of for any of these Netflix or Amazon or Hulu movies. How much did they spend even on Black Panther? They spent like $150 million promoting a movie that people already were eager to see just from the trailers. And yet they felt they had to back it up with advertising and promotion and commercial tie-ins, so that by the day that movie opened, everybody in the world knew about Black Panther. That costs money. And the services we're talking about, though I think they're doing a lot of really good work and supporting a lot of really good filmmakers, indie filmmakers, documentary filmmakers, all kinds of filmmakers. They are not investing that kind of money in just sheer advertising and promotion.
Because it's a quantity game for Netflix. They want as much as possible. They want a new movie every week. And here's the other interesting thing as a critic. They want a movie most of the time you can watch while you're also playing games on your phone in the background.
Yeah.
The way people watch Netflix and streaming services should be something that film critics are interested in.
Yeah.
Well, Matt, I want to ask you about that too. Zoller sites. The way people watch, you nodded with that. The way people watch movies. Let's talk about that. How does that affect all of your jobs as a critic?
Well, I get a little cranky about this issue because I think that movies as we know it are probably slowly on their way out. And by that I don't mean like stories told in moving pictures. I mean stories that are between 90 minutes and 3 hours long and that are intended to be seen in a single sitting with people actually paying attention to the screen. And it's true that, there were times when, I know you're shaking your head no, but dude, I'm telling you. Yes, I know that it's true that throughout the history of motion pictures, there have always been times when people weren't into the movie they were seeing and they kind of zoned out a little bit. But I'm talking about the communal experience of gathering together to sit and meditate on this beautiful thing that is flickering in front of you on the screen and trying to the best of your ability to be into the story and lose yourself and give yourself over to the experience, and not just to the story that's happening on the screen, but to the fact that you are not in control of this particular moment and you are giving your time to it and you are surrendering to it. And I think what has changed, and it's really, in the last 10 years since I think the introduction of the smartphone, 12, I guess. Smartphones really became a thing like just in the last 6 or 7 years. When you have this endless array of entertainment options, and by entertainment options I mean distractions, if something is not compelling your attention, grabbing you and shaking you every single second, you start to get bored. And I'm somebody who really prides himself on my ability to concentrate on the screen and really look and listen. And even I find that I'm fighting this tendency to just say, like, well, what else is happening? What else is happening? That's what I think is ultimately the enemy of what I call cinema. And that's what I mean by cinema, is that giving yourself over to the experience, whatever that may be. And later you process it, you talk about it, you talk about what did I think of it, what did I feel about it, and all of that. And what it comes down to is ultimately that we are an inherently selfish species, and I think that technology has enabled us to be more selfish. By that I mean like not participating in what's happening in the room, not participating in an experience that we're not in control of. And you think about how many times you have heard people say, "How long is the movie? 2 hours and 2.5 hours. I can't go see that. That's too long." And then they binge watch, 2 seasons of Breaking Bad in 3 days. And I often get into arguments with people about this. I get in a lot of arguments because that's what I do. But this idea that I say, well, people's attention spans have shortened, and people say, well, oh yeah? Well, what about the fact that people love to binge watch television shows? And I tell them, they're in control of that
You can
experience.
also
They're in
pause it
control
and
of it.
go
Yeah.
make a sandwich or go
Yeah.
to the bathroom.
Or whatever.
That's why they're in control. Yeah.
And also you're not in any danger unless you're watching a movie with, 3 or 4 family members or close friends and getting irritated because they're checking their phones and it's a movie that means something to you, which is something that's also happened to me. But you don't have to give yourself over to it. I mean, I really feel like it's like movies are compared to being in church, and I think the church of cinema, as we know it, is kind of endangered in that way because we are too eager to be looking over. It's like when you're at a party, you're either concentrating on the person you're talking to, or you're looking over your shoulder to see if there's somebody more interesting. And this phone has enabled us to be constantly looking over our shoulder to see if there's someone more interesting we could be talking to. And as a result, the perfectly interesting moment that's happening in front of us is not being really savored.
I completely
Excuse me,
agree with you, but I want to ask you about
Yes, and I
Could you
see
repeat
this.
that, Matt? I was playing Tetris while you were talking.
There you go.
Could you repeat that? But I saw some hope in the movie A Quiet Place, because that is one that people are going to and giving themselves over, being quiet, not on their phones.
Yeah.
And I went and I saw it with
Annihilation
regular
is
people.
another one. I had the most amazing experience seeing Annihilation, like probably in the last couple days. It was in the theater. I did not come to yours, but not on purpose. But
I had a screening of it.
and it was sold out, and it was like dead quiet. And I had this huge conversation with a stranger, and we walked to the train and continued on talking about this movie.
That's more like a film festival experience.
It was amazing,
Yeah.
and it was a regular audience, and it was like 1 o'clock on a Sunday. So there was that. Hidden Figures was mentioned, was another. There are like it was again packed with like book clubs, like little old lady book clubs, and like the girls, and it was like it was an unbelievable. So I still try because I see so many things just in screenings or on my laptop at home. So I turn off my phone. I want to pretend that I'm not sitting on my couch in my pajamas. So I do try to see stuff as much as possible with, regular people the way I always did before I started writing about movies. And sometimes people do have their cell phones. I remember seeing Selma, and it was like the lights of cell phones were all around me. I was like, are you,
It's like the episode of Seinfeld where they're making out during Schindler's List.
make out during the movies.
Claudia, I'd like to say something.
Yes,
about,
please.
We're talking about watching and the time span. I have a weekly radio show that I've been on the air now 10 years, and I see my segment as more as sound bites now. My reviews have been reduced to, they were 20 minutes, I'm down to about 4 now. And I know for one review. And I know our Dean Richards at WGN, he reviews 3 films in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. So
Was he like an auctioneer?
That's a nice word for what
that's
Dean
the
was.
change that I've seen.
Yes.
That's truly the change that I've seen as far as my job is concerned. And it's not easy. You have so much more to say as a critic.
Yes.
And trying to get those important sound bites in, it's just difficult.
Well, I think this is a wild time, truly, to be doing. We all do it differently here. Everybody, we all have a kind of a weird number of jobs on the side of our jobs, if we even have a central job. And I often wish we could just simply develop mass amnesia, to go with the critical mass here, and just literally start over and sort of assess this new overpacked landscape anew, rather than kind of drag our old sort of doubts and prejudices and all the rest of it about like how are we going to handle film and television and all these streaming platforms and all of it. it's right now it's like looking at the Seurat painting, Sunday in the Park, from 3 inches away. Like, you know, and life does not make it easy to step back and, okay, here we are. Now, what do I want to explore? That's very hard right now, and I think it's yeah. I'll just leave it. I'll leave it with Seurat.
I increasingly use going to the movie. This is something that's just happened in the last probably 3 or 4 years. I have started treating movies as a form of mental calisthenics. And I didn't used to do that, and I think that I used to be like pre-smartphone and pre-internet. I think everybody watched movies this way for the most part. You know, it's like now it is time to leave myself behind and meditate upon this thing that is happening in front of me. And we used to do it at concerts, at art museums, and all that kind of stuff. And like, I'm not saying we're bad people because we're having a harder time doing this. There's environmental factors that are at play, and I think, you know, the phrase "use it or lose it" really comes to mind a lot. And when I go to a movie, I find myself thinking. I enter this mental state where it's like I'm meditating. And if I'm watching the movie, it's like watch the movie, pay attention to the movie, think about what's happening with the characters, with the filmmaking, and all that stuff. And if I start to think about, God, you know what, I gotta go file my taxes soon, and are we out of milk? You know, stuff like that. It's like you got to push those thoughts out of your head and go return to the movie, and it's a good exercise. And reading books, I've started reading a lot more fiction. I was kind of out of reading fiction for a while, and I've gotten back into it. And I read on the train, and I intentionally turn my phone off and take my earbuds and stick them in my pocket, and I sit there on a train and I highlight passages with a highlighter. I'm a person who writes in their books. I know some people are horrified by that, but I do it. And I make a point of how long is my train ride? 45 minutes? Well, I'm going to read for 45 minutes, and I'm going to really pay attention to what's on the page and try not to be distracted by what's happening on the train, which is not easy in New York. And I feel like I am training my mind to strengthen these muscles that are in danger of atrophying because of the way we live. And I think, you know, cinema is a great. It's like it's the mental bench press of our time. Like we need to be like working out through these art forms, and otherwise we're just going to be like little 3-year-olds distracted by whatever's shiny.
I agree with that, and one of the things that I've always been a big advocate for and that I've written books about is introducing children and teenagers to older movies, which do stretch their attention spans, because as much as I love Black Panther and some of these other movies, they very much are reflective of our ADDization of our culture. And a lot of kids will say, black and white movies are boring. And I remember my daughter said that to me, and I said, oh, well, maybe if you just watch the first 6 minutes, then you can leave. And it was Duck Soup, which has become one of her favorite. I mean, who's not going to love Duck Soup? And so I got them into old movies that way, but I think they really help to that mindfulness exercise. They really help to stretch the attention span and also lead to some very interesting conversations, like, why are there propellers on that plane? What is a telegram?
I remember when I introduced my kids to Young Frankenstein, and I was watching it, and I thought, oh, this is so slow compared to the movies they're used to, which is weird to think of Mel Brooks as slow. And they were so into it, and it became like their favorite movie, too. So sometimes we underestimate.
Well, that's a great, I'll just be quick
sure.
here. Just take 5 minutes.
Sure.
It's the first. Trust me.
Go for it. Go.
You want 10? Go ahead.
That has become the most interesting new wrinkle since everything that's happened in the culture since Harvey Weinstein and Time's Up and all of that. When we all go back and watch movies we loved from everywhere, silent era, early 30s, it's amazing now to watch it with kids or folks who haven't seen those films, and these films are flunking every test, the Bechdel test. They're hostile toward every possible race except the Anglos. Everything. But being a critic means juggling all these really rough, contradictory sort of reactions at one time. it's possible to love a movie for one thing and kind of resist it on 5 other fronts, and it doesn't make it simple. But that
Molly Ringwald's piece about the John Hughes
that was
movie,
great.
brilliant.
That was the
And
best
you
criticism I read in a long
must read that
time.
in the New Yorker. It's just outstanding.
But-
It's beautifully written.
But I appreciated her thoughts, and she's the best person to give them. But when you look at an old movie, you're learning about the culture then and now.
Yes.
And that's important too, because you can see our progress and our not progress. So, I get a little upset, like a lot of, I'm not saying you, but a lot of younger journalists do these 25-year anniversary pieces, or 30 or 50 or what.
And they don't know anything.
They weren't even alive back
They know
then.
something.
In my day, motion pictures were shot on corn.
But what I'm saying is you can do research and find out how it was perceived in its day and how it's perceived now. You have to do both. You just don't say, oh, look how sucky this is because of this and that. Well, that's a judgment and you can have it, but do the research. And, it is, like Gone with the Wind is now this thing. I mean, it's still probably the biggest grosser of all time, but it's become this artifact now that gets very debated because do you feel guilty watching it, knowing what the lightened period, or as enlightened as it is now, but you should take away from it what it was to the people then too. And that's the thing with Oscars too. I kind of treat the Best Picture winner every year. People will go back and say, how did that win? Like The Greatest Show on Earth, or they say that's the worst. I love that movie, but they say it's the worst Oscar winner ever. But it basically won because of the McCarthyism against the cowboy.
High noon.
Thank you.
Actually, I think Crash is the worst movie to win on the Oscar for Best Picture.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But
Yes.
see, nobody-
But you know what, Michael?
Roger would disagree.
Michael.
Nobody talks about Crash now. Everybody still references Brokeback Mountain.
Yeah, but
so that's
as far as
something.
Gone with the Wind, I just wanted to say, because I know that there's a lot of people who debate this movie, is that sometimes I feel like there's half of the picture being talked about, because yes, we have to take this movie in context. It was a product of his time, and yes, people did love it. But there's also the fact that African Americans at that time protested that movie. A lot of people don't talk about that the NAACP, and there were a lot of Negro leagues. You can do a search on Twitter where you can see they were picketing outside of this movie. And this is a continual fight, even decades later. We're still fighting against the portrayal of black people. I mean, it's just packaged differently. Crash is a perfect example of that. It was crap. I mean, it was what it was.
Thank
You know what I mean? And I think what's changing.
Best movie of 2005.
I like
His
it for what
spirit
it
is
was,
here.
but I think now what's great now, what's changing the landscape is now we're getting to tell our stories. It's not white people telling us what we think about black people. It's black people telling us that are creating the narrative and driving the narrative. Like a movie like Selma. I know Steven Spielberg wants to make a movie about MLK and even asked David Oyelowo to come back to portray it. I'm kind of curious about that.
Pass.
I'm also curious
No.
about the fact that he bought the speeches for MLK, which is why we could not see the speeches in Selma. Yeah, Ava will tell you that. Luckily for her, she was also a double major in African American history, so all she did was look at the speeches and basically paraphrase it. So you have this powerful white man that is actually owning the rights to MLK, which is a whole other thing I don't wanna
Well,
talk
you
about,
mentioned
but-
before, the year of The Help
Yeah.
versus Pariah.
Yeah.
I mean, The Help was made by white people.
Well, I mean,
Oh, really?
no, but
Shocker.
Yeah, well, the politics about that are also interesting to me too, because I know when The Help came out, you had women like Melissa Harris Perry and other black women academics and other black academics in general that were saying this is why this movie is so harmful, and it's basically a white Jesus trope that is, embodied in this plucky college student, this college graduate, and there was a lot of talk about that, and I know for a fact that I had white women critics, I will not name them, who were DMing me that were telling me, well, the whole thing is we want to get Viola and Octavia you know, Oscar nominations. And so we have to rally around this movie. Yeah, I know it's problematic, but, and I was like, girl, no. This is why we have a problem with this movie. Like, you literally had this black woman make a pie. I don't know if she put poo in it or not. But I mean, it's just, the fact is, like, Viola only had how much screen time? You know what I mean? And we all know that the civil rights movement was driven and led by black people and with white allies. And you totally made it, while it is fictional, it's ahistorical, and it's, you know what I mean? So, yeah, so even then you had white women critics who felt that they were being helpful, but silencing black women critics at the same time.
Well, you could do that. You can do an entire miserable film festival on the films that were only greenlit because they got some white actor to headline it. You know, Glory, good film otherwise, except you have to put up with a Matthew Broderick story. Mississippi Burning, a complete, you know, this sort of like galling revisionist history about the civil rights
Oh, The
movement,
Blind
right?
Side. Ugh.
The Blind Side. You know, and it's all
Don't get me started.
and it's all quote well-meaning, but it's all just sort of well-meaning in a way that perpetuates the power structure as it is in Hollywood.
Well,
Marshall's definitely an example of that. Yeah. Thurgood Marshall was about Josh Gad. Come on. Yeah.
Yeah, but you also had Thurgood Marshall beating the crap out of crackers, which I thought was awesome. So, he was like superhero Thurgood Marshall. I didn't know that Thurgood Marshall had a killer roundhouse. But I was going to say...
He was handsome, too. He looked just like Chadwick Boseman.
It was great. It was great. He was fit. He had abs. I didn't know that Thurgood Marshall had abs like that. It was awesome. But I was going to say... I'm a little reluctant to go all out on this sort of like idea of we're looking back on history from the vantage point of our enlightened present, because I am a child who grew up in the 70s. And if you lived through the 70s, whatever age you were, you remember that people in the 70s thought they had reached peak enlightenment, and they were looking back over the great rolling distance of ignorance that was all the history that had occurred prior to 1970, and they're like, well, we're done now. And now you go back and you look and you see there's all kinds of attitudes that were, you know, problematic, to put it mildly. Like, you know, the Oscars, I was watching for research purposes, watching some old videos of the Oscars. And there were a lot of homophobic jokes being made from the podium at the Oscars. The idea of making gay jokes at the Oscars, it's like, what? Seriously, like even in the 70s, I was kind of shocked that happened, but it happened all the time. And there was a, you know, and what I'm saying is, like, I think that there's a fundamental arrogance to, you know, the way we watch movies from the moment that we're in, because, like, yes, we have the benefit of hindsight, we have the benefit of all the generations that came before us, but I think we have to maintain a little humility about where we are, because there's all kinds of stuff that's problematic right now that we don't even know is problematic. We don't even know is problematic, and I think, like, be a little more humble about the vantage point that you're coming at when you critique an older film, and bear in mind it's like, there but for the grace of God go I. You know, like, I'm not saying you can't identify things like some of the sexual behavior in movies, even from like 10, 20 years ago, wouldn't pass muster now. You know, it wouldn't pass muster now, but that doesn't mean that we kind of pull like a baby version of the Taliban and let's like topple all of the old monuments and never speak of them again. When we go to an art museum, we're not walking around looking at the paintings thinking, well, I don't approve of what's in that painting. It's historical. It's of historical and aesthetic interest, and we are able to detach ourselves from it a little bit and be passionate about what we're looking at, but not necessarily wearing it like it's the jersey of our favorite sports team. And like, this movie represents everything that I'm about. We're able to look at it and say, this is an interesting thing for the following reasons. It's disturbing in these ways and beautiful in other ways, and and we can put a little distance between it. And I think, like, I often think that a lot of these controversies over movies, like, if we could somehow superimpose a couple of little layers between us and the art and look at it as like a product of its time, and like 100 years from now people are going to look at it and go, are they crazy? How could people like this?
I always tell people art doesn't exist in a vacuum. Like, people come to us on our comment boards especially and say, don't bring politics into this review. Everything is reflecting the world it's in.
That always means don't bring your politics.
Yeah, exactly. That's usually what that means. And I always say to them, art doesn't exist in a vacuum. It reflects the world it's in, the world it's being created in, and the world it's being watched in, and the time it's being created and watched in.
Well, I think to Matt's point too, there's too many critics who really find the struggle of holding two or more conflicting opinions about the same work of art within the same work of art difficult. Therefore, they take the easier route. And I think this is very Frank Rich. You know, we know the writer Frank Rich, right? Who worked as a film critic sometime. His exit column in the New York Times when he went to HBO full time. He in sort of a hit and run way, he acknowledged the fact that he really felt a little intellectually dishonest for never writing enough mixed reviews.
Well, look at Rotten Tomatoes, and that forces us into not being mixed, right? I mean, you have to have a you have to have a, not a thumbs up or thumbs down, but you have to have, rotten or fresh.
No, Claudia, they're sponsoring this. We can't
I
talk
know
about
they
that.
are.
They should have a slightly wrinkled tomato that represents kind of the movie.
Slightly
Edible,
overcooked,
edible.
Yeah.
But the hardest reviews to write are the 2.5
Absolutely.
stars.
The
Because
middling
you're like,
ones.
well, on one hand, I like this, and on the other hand.
But that's what most movies are.
That's what most movies are.
But when I'm wavering, I will go to a B- rather than a C+, because I feel if I am wavering, it should get a ripe tomato. And so I'm very affected by that.
Very kind.
Yeah.
So I want to
I
go
feel the
down.
exact opposite as you.
Do
The
you?
exact
That's interesting.
opposite. I will say,
Millennials.
I'm
Is it the pessimist optimist thing?
Well,
Glass half
I don't know.
full?
We're all selfish, apparently, to Matt, which is good.
Yeah.
It's true, including me.
Can I say, I'm the youngest person on this panel, and I.
We've noted that.
Yeah, we got it. We made the jokes. Okay, great. Can I tell you, I am not even young enough to answer your question originally. You need, here's a good example.
Okay, bye.
Bye. See ya. My sister and I have a sister and a brother. They're both 16. This will be brief. My brother Nate cannot watch anything that's not sci-fi, and doesn't care about music of any kind.
Kids today.
No. Hold on.
Their jalapenos and their rumble seats.
And then you meet Maya, who is the exact same age, and who every night falls asleep to Seinfeld, and when she goes to school, listens to Todd Rundgren. So, at the end of the day, we are all different.
Okay, on that wonderful note, I want to give you a couple minutes to ask questions, but I would like to have you all, starting with Matt down there, make sure you give your name and the outlet that you work for so people can read you, and quickly say, in about a sentence, the best and worst thing about being a critic.
Oh my God.
Go, right now. Starting with Matt.
Matt Fagerholm, RogerEbert.com. Best thing about being a critic is I'm doing what I love, and worst thing is answering a question like this.
See, I'm being reductive. It's sort of like the fresh tomato and rotten tomato. Yeah. Rebecca.
Rebecca Theodore Vachon, Entertainment Weekly, The Urban Daily. Best thing about being a critic is advocating for movies that I love. The worst thing is being a woman having an opinion on social media.
That's good.
Scott Nance, up until 3 months ago, I was the film critic for Access Hollywood, so I'm currently without an outlet. And Sarah, just what you were saying about reviews, I, for 20 years, wrote reviews, and I love writing reviews, but I didn't really get a lot of traffic, so I switched more to broadcast, where I had 2 or 3 minutes to review 4 movies, and that's just what the state of film criticism was on a broadcast level. So I'm without an outlet. So if any of you guys are hiring, but having said that, the best thing of all about being a critic is, like what you said, being able to champion a film, not a big studio tentpole film that doesn't need to be championed, but a film like Moonlight, a film like Get Out, a film like Spotlight, a film like Call Me by Your Name. And yes, I know it became popular, but I loved the hell out of La La Land. But I also would say that the worst thing about it is the worst thing about being a critic is just trying to justify being a critic and to make a living off of being a critic, which I think is really, really hard to do these days.
Brian Tellerico, RogerEbert.com. For me, the best thing is the community, the people up here and the writers I'm inspired and influenced by and happy to call friends and colleagues. And the worst thing is keeping up with it all. I do film, TV, video games, books, and it's overwhelming, and it's increasingly overwhelming.
And he has kids.
And 3 kids. 3 kids under 9. So every day is an adventure.
Brian,
Sarah Knight Adamson. I'm a freelance writer, but I have a radio show that I've been on for 10 years, Hollywood 360 Radio Network. I'm on 90 stations nationally and some international stations. I do like to write. I've written for 12 years, and I guess the best thing for me about being a critic is that I love film, and I love to champion it as an art form. So for me to be in the theater and just watching a film every day, if I see a film, I'm happy. I did ask Roger years ago about his typical day, and he said, a really good day is 3 movies. Am I right? Yes. So, and it is funny. I am very happy when I'm watching a movie. I think the hardest thing are seeing, for me, a film that I really championed or I really think has some really great parts of it. Maybe it's a 2.5, 3, but then somebody out there, maybe one of these self-proclaimed critics, just tears it down and, oh, you know, did you see the spinach in her teeth? Or, you know, these comments that aren't really analyzing and comparing, contrasting, using higher thinking skills like we all do here. So that's my deal.
Michael Phillips, I'm the film critic of the Chicago Tribune. The best.
Not familiar with that publication? Is that available? Michael Phillips, is it? Okay.
Yes.
Sorry.
It's still here, just like the Sondheim song. You know? Worst thing is writing a lead that I would personally read past. I find that difficult. I did when I was 17, and I do when I'm 57. But the great thing is the privilege of working out why you love something or don't love something, and being specific so that whatever you're writing actually works for people who might see it tomorrow. And actually, the best thing about being a film critic right now is, honest to God, being right here at Ebertfest.
Sam Fragoso. I host a show called Talk Easy and Write for the Internet, which is an awful sentence.
Do you mean that which way a sentence?
Yeah.
What's the circulation figure on the internet?
You know, it's like Netflix. We really don't know. Wow, the best part of writing about movies is obviously the movies. It means being, like what Matt said, being transported in some way, an escape from reality in a way that you can't find elsewhere. And the worst part about being a film critic is then re-entering that same reality. And also the pay is awful. So
Susan. I'm Susan Lozena. My name is spelled wrong. There's an extra Z.
ZYZ.
Yeah. Sometimes I forget. But, so maybe my name, it's been a curse and a blessing, because once they get it, and it's also an icebreaker, but that's okay. But the best thing about being a critic is how long I've been able to do so. And after I was at USA Today for almost 30 years, and most of that being a film writer, I did interviews. I covered movies every which way, including being a critic. And there were buyouts in 2013, and I was afraid that that part of my life was going to end. And then lovely Chaz kept Roger's work going, and I was able to start over. And with that name behind me, I've been very lucky that I've gotten other opportunities. Right now, I live in DC, and I asked the editor who does their movies, can I freelance for you? And they go, yeah. But part of it's because, you know, I have still cachet from you and USA Today, and I've been very lucky to continue. I only do 1 review a week, and usually it's only opening at some Angelica pop-up place, but I still love it because I'm in the actual paper again. So that, yeah. The downside is you do have to see a lot of bad movies, but I get paid for it, and I get paid if they're bad or good. So.
We see them so you don't have to.
Yes.
Matt Zoller sites, RogerEbert.com, New York Magazine, and various other venues. I guess the worst thing for me about being a critic is realizing how many things I still haven't seen after 30 years of doing this, and how I'm probably not going to get to see all of them because it's mathematically impossible. And the best thing is that sweet, sweet Marvel money. that I get for giving Marvel films good reviews. They dumped sacks of cash out of planes like right into your backyard, and it's awesome. And I drove here in a tank, the tank from Despicable Me. I bought with my Marvel money. No, the best thing is finding a like-minded community of people who are really, really into that movie that you thought that only you saw. Like, there's some movies where it's like, am I the only person who saw that? And then thanks to the internet, you're able to find that there are other people who love that obscure film as much as you did. And Annihilation, which has been mentioned a couple of times here, this is probably one of my favorite movies of the last 10 years, and I've seen it 4 times. I was very lucky to live in in the United States in a theater in a city that showed that movie in the theater, which is where I really think it was meant to be seen. And I posted on the internet, this theater near the Port Authority bus terminal was showing it. They were getting rid of it after Thursday night and turning it over. This is like 4 weeks into its run, and I said, I'm going to the 8:20 show of Annihilation at this theater if anybody wants to come with me. And it turns out there was a 65-seat house, and they sold it out. And we had a little film club, and we all went to this diner. Not all 60, it was like 35 or 40 of us, but still a lot. And we sat there for 90 minutes discussing Annihilation, and every single person, I'm not kidding you, had a different interpretation of what that movie was actually about. And somebody made a list of all the different interpretations, wrote it down, and it was on the back of a menu. He wrote it down, and I saved it, and I'm going to have it framed. And that to me that's what movie-going is about, when you have that kind of experience. And it was a multi-generational, racial, gender balanced. I mean, this movie drew people together in a way that very few movies do, and I can't even believe that Paramount wasn't able to capitalize on this movie. I just don't understand it.
I'm Sheila O'Malley. I write for Roger Ebert and regularly for Film Comment. I think the best thing for me about being a film critic is that I am a film critic. I mean, it's it just came. I didn't really set out to do it. I wrote about Cary Grant and Dean Stockwell on my blog, and that's how it began. So the fact that I get to, that people want to read me on, actors primarily, is just gravy. I absolutely love doing it. I love seeing movies. I love actors in particular. So that is probably the best thing, as well as the friends that I've made and like-minded people. The worst thing is, I just don't make enough money, and sometimes you write about something. Sometimes enthusiasm is seen as suspect, especially in film critic land. I don't know why. But if you're like, oh my God, this movie is so good, which is how I would say it with my actor friends, and it's understood. Film critics are like, well, actually, yep. And I operate from enthusiasm. It's not hard for me to pan something, but if it deserves it, I'm gonna go for it. But when you're super excited about something, it's like middle school again. They sniff it out. You're weak. I'm gonna get you, And I've been dealing with that since I was 5 and into Underdog and Kimba the White Line. So people have been telling me to calm down with my enthusiasm. So I'm impervious to that. But anyway, that's probably, I can handle it, but it's the worst thing.
Passion is everything.
Hi, Richard Roper, Chicago Sun-Times, ABC Television, WGN. But I think my most in-depth criticism comes on my Insta stories, my Snapchat, and my Boomerang in particular, which is 1.7 seconds, which just keeps everyone's riveted. I echo a lot of the best and worst we're hearing. One of the worst things for me, but I'm going to give you 2 really quick. One is that people are writing pieces and criticizing movies based on trailers, which, and then I find myself sometimes on radio or television debating someone who's ripping apart a movie they have not seen. So I think everybody on this panel can agree, we're going to continue to see the movie, then give you an opinion. See the movie, and you can't switch those 2. Those are not interchangeable. And for me personally, this isn't the worst thing in the world, but the constant onslaught of reboots, remakes, reimaginings. If Peter Parker goes into that fucking lab one more time and gets bit by a spider, I'm starting to root for the spider at this point. Come on, we're going to make another Spidey. You have to see how it happened. For the best thing, I'm going to get specific and a little selfish on this, because for me, instead of just talking about being a critic, for me, the best thing, I can't talk about being a critic without talking about the fact that I had the blessing and the privilege to see about 2,000 movies and review more than 1,000 movies with Roger Ebert. So I'll be forever grateful for that.
I'm Nell Minow. I write for RogerEbert.com and MovieMom.com. You can find me on Twitter at MovieMom. And, I have a lot of opinions. I can watch an infinite number of movies, and I like to write. So all of those things make me extremely happy to be a critic. I would say I also have a very, very high tolerance for bad movies because I'm a lawyer, and I can tell you that the worst movie is still more entertaining than the best lawyer meeting. And I love my buddies. I love coming to Ebertfest. I always say Ebertfest is like Brigadoon. Once a year we get to come to live in Ebertville for a few days, and it's my other home, so it's wonderful to be here.
What was the question? I'm Leonard Maltin. I write for my website, leonardmaltin.com. Everybody should check it out. And I teach at USC. And thank you, Nell. And I'm hosting a podcast every week called Maltin on Movies with my daughter and having a great time doing that. That's our brave new world. I always say the best thing about being a film critic is seeing movies before they open. I don't watch trailers. I avoid trailers. I want to see the movie as fresh as I can, clean slate. And I hate seeing trailers that give away all the good jokes, that reveal who survived the explosion. I don't want to know that. I just want to see the movie. So that's always been the best part for me. Along with the fact that I get to do it, that I get to express, I want to express myself. I'm a writer. I've been writing since I was 12. And I love having the ability to do that. And it's been many different media over the years, sometimes for employers, sometimes on my own. Doesn't matter. I just, if no one's going to pay me, I'm going to do it myself anyway. And there we are.
That's a true writer. Do we have time for some questions? Okay. Right here, this young man with the bow tie. Oh, okay. He's beat you there.
First off, thanks to Rotten Tomatoes. I would not have watched Mudbound if it wasn't for you all. Good score on Rotten Tomatoes, and then I read about it and liked it. So why don't we have that at Ebertfest next year? I think that'd be a great idea. So we can see that.
Pariah. Or the same film, the same director's Pariah would be a great one too.
Yeah, we should watch
and
that.
the second thing, I'm going to put, I think there's a RogerEbert.com test talking about the different tests, and I'm going to start applying this just for fun. When I was young, there was Leonard Maltin, and then there was Ebert and Siskel, and then there was Ebert and Roper. And then there's all of you people. I know most of your names. So I'm going to go to Ebertfest, RogerEbert.com this next year, and I'm going to pick 5 women and 5 men. And that's all the reviews I'm going to read for a while. But I guess I'm supposed to ask a question, and I do have a question, and you all, none of you would probably admit this, but I love being in a big theater, and I turn off my cell phone, but then I go home, and there's movies that I watch at home, and I watch them like books. Like, I'm not going to finish 7 Brides for 7 Women until next week when I get back home. Do you ever do that? Do you watch it 15 minutes and then 15 minutes the next day, like a book? I find that very interesting to do that. Not near as much as being in a big theater, but I'm curious. Anyone want to fess up?
Well, only if it's a movie that I've seen before will I do that. Because, yeah, I mean, listen, I can't stand it, no offense to anyone who does this, but it's just not my cup of tea. If you're going to start a movie, finish it. If you intend to start a movie, finish it. It's one thing if you're watching it at home and you're tired, whatever, you fall asleep, whatever. But if you can finish it, if you can start it, finish it. The only time I ever watch a film knowing that I may not, probably won't watch the whole thing, is if I come home and it's late and I'm a little wired and I just need to decompress, I'll put on a movie I've seen like 100 times, like Blade Runner or Close Encounters, and just sort of like veg out. But if it's a movie I've never seen before, if I watch it, I finish it. I can't stand when people say, no offense, they'll say, "Oh yeah, I started watching Get Out last night. I'm going to finish it tonight." I'm like, "Well, let's start from the beginning and watch the whole damn thing."
If I'm writing about it, I watch it in one sitting.
We're all different.
Yeah, I have to watch movies all in one sitting because if I watch part of it, then when I go back the next day, I really just have to start it over because I'm like, who's that guy?
I also
What
think
is the name of that? What organization is that person with? You know, like I need to have the continuous experience.
Sorry, so we're gonna have to go because I want to give everybody a chance.
Let's go.
Can you make your comments responsibly brief? We may have to limit our responses from here to just one person per person here.
Okay. This is a general question on film scholarship. From Eisenstein and Bazin to Christian Mentz, are there areas of film theory yet to be explored or would benefit from further exploration?
Leonard, you want to take that one? No?
Why me? How do I get stuck?
Are there any critics in the room?
I always say to be an effective critic, you must have love or passion, if you prefer, and knowledge. And if you're missing either one of those components, you can't be very good at your job. So you can define knowledge any way you want, whether it's theoretical knowledge, practical knowledge, whatever you want to pursue there. But those two things are imperative.
Thank you so much.
Hello, it's an honor. And basically, Roger Ebert once said that a modern movie day audience is more likely to see a film that they feel is mediocre as opposed to one that may or may not be great, one that may take a risk. How would you feel in the last 20 years or so? How have film-going audiences basically grown? Have they grown to see more films, take more risks, or are they still in that state of going to Burger King instead of a nice restaurant?
Familiarity is king for modern movie audiences. If you look at the top 10 films every year, they're almost all based on other properties or sequels or parts of franchises. So I think for the last 3 years, every film in the top 10 has been a sequel or a Marvel movie or a product based on something else, or a Disney film or Star Wars.
Disney's whole business plan now is to remake everything from my childhood too. So it kind of disturbs me, not that some of those are worthy things, but it's like Disney used to come up with ideas.
There's
it's ideas to make more money with the stuff we already have.
There's a financial component too, though, in what you're talking about. If I take my 3 kids and my wife and we get popcorn and pay for parking and buy tickets, it's $100. And if it's something familiar that we know is going to be, okay, and we'll all be satisfied, as opposed to something that could be horrible and we just spend $100, I think people they go to McDonald's because they know what McDonald's tastes like. They go to Marvel movies because they know what a Marvel movie is going to be.
Thank you. Oh, and also to quote Tommy Lee Jones.
One question.
I don't know about that.
Try, wow, Shay.
Give you the bow tie.
We have only 10 minutes left, and then the room needs to be used.
Like the darkest hour there for a second. Hey, no.
Hello, friends.
Step right
Chike Coleman here from Real Reviews, the Cinematic Underground and Real Reviews Rewind for Urbana Public Television. So here's my one question to you all. Has it become more important how a story is told versus that a story is being told overall? Why?
I think it's how it's being told. I mean, you brought up A Quiet Place. How that movie was told is a reason why everybody went nuts for it at the first screening at South by Southwest. It exploded on social media. Critics loved it. 95% right now certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. They are a sponsor for today. But I think if you look at how a movie is told, and that movie in particular, it was fresh, it was different, and it was something that people hadn't seen before in that way, and that is really what sold that film.
I want to quote Roger because it's my favorite Roger quote. It's on my business card. It's not what a movie is about, it's how it is about it.
Okay.
There you go.
Thank you. All right. Good question. Next question.
Next time we should make the whole hour questions. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Brief comment. thank you, Sam, for bringing up the need to find critics that you enjoy and follow what they say.
Did I say that?
Yeah.
Right.
It was as a preteen here in CU, growing up reading and watching Roger, that I realized cinema could be approached in an artistic and intellectual way, and why I became a writer and why I wanted to make film. So, but my quick question is, with the growing and highly accessible DSLR and more quote unquote independent filmmakers and YouTube, how does the oversaturation of independent filmmakers affect cinema? But how can you also champion great independent filmmakers that don't have the $10,000, $20,000, $50,000 budgets that catch people's eyes?
I mean, you just have to, if you love something, write about it again, talk about it on Twitter, demand people see it. I mean, I've been, you know, and people will get annoyed, but you do, and if someone does, like Mudbound was one of them, and I wrote about Garrett Hedlund's performance for Roger Ebert. That was just one of the performances we wanted to talk about. And it's really gratifying. I mean, but there's only so much you can do, but don't be afraid to be enthusiastic, as I said before. People may get sick of it, but if you really feel like something is, like when Rachel Morrison, I'm a member of the New York Film Critics Circle, and she won Best Cinematography, the first woman in like the 70-year history of that organization. It was just the feeling in that room when we voted was like, oh my God, this is what, because Roger Deakins was on the, you know, these giants who also do wonderful work, but it was super meaningful, and that just came from a year of saying, see this movie, pay attention. Anyway, long answer.
Okay, Godfather shirt man. We appreciate you.
The Dogfather?
Dogfather.
Oh, Dogfather.
It's not a Snoop Dogg reference.
Oh, all the better.
My name's Jerry. I'm an unpaid critic.
Well, hi, Jerry. You can just say critic. Just say critic.
Hi, Jerry.
Look, the best I can say about my readership is at least my mom thinks I'm cool.
Oh, that's so nice.
So,
No, sincerely, that's great. I'm glad.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Don't patronize me.
Please ask your question.
The question is, how do I stop being an unpaid critic? Is there an avenue to this, or do I just get lucky?
I'll answer that one. Hi. You have a blog, right?
I have 2 blogs, 2 websites, and a podcast.
Okay, that's great. No, I think one of the things I always tell people is you should definitely have platforms where you're writing, and also you need to network with people. Like if there's a specific outlet that you want to write for, I find out who the editors are and I start following them. Then I start following other people that write as well, and just start a conversation with them. I mean, a lot of people are very accessible on Twitter. Whether you agree with something that they've written or disagreed, I think that's the best thing you can do is to find out who these people are, and then you can send pitch letters. Send 3 of your best pieces or what you think, and make sure that they're edited, grammatically correct, factually correct, and just have a list like, okay, these are my top 10, or top 5 outlets that I want to write for. Let me reach out to these editors and see if they're interested, because I think the great thing about social media is now people can see your work. I know that I've definitely gotten opportunities that way. People will just reach out to me and be like, oh, I saw something that you wrote, and what's your email or whatever, or DM me, and yeah.
And Rebecca's on Patreon, right?
Yes, I am.
I'm one of her patrons on Patreon, and
Thank
I
you.
encourage everybody else to do the same.
Can I give a practical piece of advice about pitching? I tell people, well, Brian and I get a lot of pitches. We say no many more times than we say yes, and usually the reason we say no is people are pitching the same piece and it's very vague. Like, Clint Eastwood has a new movie out. I'd like to write a piece about the films of Clint Eastwood. It's like the world doesn't need another piece like that. Your best odds of breaking in, if you don't have a whole lot of bylines, is to pitch things that it would only occur to you to pitch. Like if there's a possibility that 8,000 or 9,000 other people are going to have this idea, don't pitch it. There's no point, because there's a long line of people who are more established than you who are going to get that job if, in fact, it's available. be weird, be yourself. That's your best shot in this kind of environment.
I teased you for your shirt, so let me give two advice. This
Okay,
one.
this is the last one.
Last one. I'm very sorry. One, have one site, not two. Condense it into one. Your podcast should be posted also on your website.
It is.
Okay, great. And collect the emails like they said, but also when you're pitching, even if you don't, it's very simple. Go to the site that you're pitching and look at the articles they have published. And even if you don't give a shit about the articles they wrote, say, I really like that article, and that article that you've been doing. I wonder if I could do something like X. Because every editor wants to know that and wants to hear that they're doing a nice job. Trust me, every editor wants to hear they're doing a good job. So be mindful of that. And also, this is the last thing, and I'm very sorry, Chaz, you're going to get 1,000 no's. And you should care about 0 of them. That's
Okay,
all.
on that
We
note,
taught you well,
thank
young
you.
Jedi.
Next. Okay.
Hi, really great to be here and thank you. This, I guess, is for whoever wants it. We have a show on Amazon, Mrs. Maisel, that won an Emmy. Great. Do you think that the Netflix, the Hulu's, the Amazon movies should be up for the Academy Awards?
Oh boy.
Yes, they should. Yes, they should. I think we were talking about Mudbound. They absolutely should.
Yeah, I saw Mudbound on my TV, yeah.
I think it's the future. I think any opinion we had on it would be kind of irrelevant because it's going that way regardless. Because that's how people are watching movies nowadays. You can't say to people, hey, you can watch Moonlight on Netflix, but this thing we put on Netflix, which had the same, Jeremy Saulnier's new film, for example, which had a similar production budget and went through all the same things, isn't a movie, but this is a movie. The lines are getting blurry, but I do think, yes, I think those films should be eligible for Academy Awards.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Hey, so I'm an undergrad here at the UFI. I'm like about 18. I'm barely a millennial. And so like my primary experience with watching movies has always been on like my computer or my laptop in bed. And there's been a lot of like talk about how every time like the death of cinema, or like how this increased accessibility can somehow be bad for the art form. But I feel like those are kind of like the same arguments that people would have made when VHSs and DVDs came out. So I really want to know what makes like the digital revolution of cinema different from any other time that art had become more accessible to
We're here to complain about it. I mean, you're right. People have talked about the death of film for decades. It's come over and over and over again, and it's never really died. I do think Matt's right that the way we watch movies is changing a little more than it used to. There used to be theatrical windows with VHS, for example, that don't exist as much anymore. So things are more day and date, immediate. The immediate satisfaction, and as he talked about, distraction aspect of digital viewing, I think does change the way we appreciate art in ways that these other technological advances didn't quite as much.
I find it interesting, though, that...
I think we have to go to the very last person because they need to turn this room over. We actually let this go way too
Over
long.
time. Everybody had so much to say. Yeah.
I wanted people who stood in line to be able to have something to say.
And you can take it outside afterwards, too. Yeah.
Take it outside.
Take it outside.
Quickly to Michael, you mentioned the artist Seurat. Thank you, because it reminded me of Loving Vincent. Truly art taken to film. The impact, the room, the influence of that or other truly artful new approaches.
All right. Thank you.
Did you have a question?
Yep, that's the question. What do you
question.
think is the impact of new artful approaches? Is there room for more like that?
Yes. We'll talk to you outside.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, audience. Thank you, critics.
Thank you, Fabia.